You know, I see it more and more these days. Long exposure photography is becoming more and more popular. And essentially what we're doing is we're taking a neutral density filter, a filter that darkens, that has just an overall darkness to it, putting it over the lens and doing a long exposure at times where, you know, you're getting a 60-second or 2-minute or 3-minute exposure where you never would be able to do that. And why would you do that? Well, you get motion. All right, you put your camera onto a tripod and you can get motion into a photo that would otherwise just be a static, still scene. All right, so here's an example. Take a look. See the water here? All right. Water has this kind of silky type of a look to it, where if you look at the same exact photo, just taken a moment before, you see it's frozen in time. Okay. And if you look at the clouds up here, there's not a ton of difference, but of course this is a half a second exposure, where if you look at the sky in this one, you're starting to get a couple of streaks in here. Okay. So I personally, I love long exposure because I think it does a great job of taking static scenes but adding motion to it. All right, we're standing there and we don't necessarily see the scene at 250th of a second. Okay, our eyes don't stop the scene. We're seeing the smooth flowing water as it goes. We're seeing if it's a windy day, we're seeing the clouds moving, but that's not captured in the photo. And long exposure to me helps capture that. Okay, so I got a couple of tricks for you if you're going to do this. Now, if you haven't done any long exposures, this video is perfect for you because now's the time to do it. Take a look. All right, longer exposure. This was, I think, 60 seconds, and the birds start to move. I like the birds here. I could clone them out, but to me, it adds to the photo. They were here, and I kind of like them sitting on the pylons. Well, what I did, I'm going to zoom in for you here, is I took an exposure without the neutral density filter on to capture everything without movement in it. This way, and remember, I'm on a tripod, so here I have the capture without the neutral density filter, and then here I have the capture with a neutral density filter and the long exposure. Well, what I can start to do here is I can bring the two of them together. Because I was on the tripod, they'll overlay perfectly with each other. All right, so what I would do is we're going to go in here, and we're going to take the long exposure photo, and we're just going to edit. Actually, go to select all. All right, so you see it selects the entire photo. Edit, copy. And then we're going to go over to the other image here. I'll zoom back out from it. And then I'm just going to do edit, paste. And what I did is I just pasted the long exposure layer on the top, and I have the regular layer right at the bottom here. Okay, if I hide it, you can see it's right there. So they're perfectly overlaid on top of each other because I was on a tripod. So what we can do here is we'll zoom in. Zoom in on the birds back here. All right, we'll work on this little guy here. I'm going to add a layer mask to the top layer. When I add a layer mask, it's all white. So if I want to paint on a layer mask, what do? I have to paint with the opposite color. So I'll select my brush tool, just hit the letter B. Black is my foreground color down here. And I'm just going to make my brush small enough. And all I'm going to do here is just start to paint in the sharper version of the bird, just like that. Okay, and then I can come in here and kind of clean up some of the edges a little bit. We'll move over to this little guy over here, and again set the foreground color and paint in the sharp version of the bird. And so now we have a bird that's not moving. All right. Now, here's another key to this, is because you'll see, sometimes, especially with long exposures, the color, the exposure might just be a little bit off. And if I paint a little bit more, you'll see that everything frozen behind there, the water that's behind there. All right. So I'll switch my foreground color to white, and I can get rid of most of that. If I go too close, I start bringing back the motion from the bird. So I'm not going to paint all the way that way. All right. I'll just paint a little bit back in there. Then what you can do at this point, add a new layer on top. Go to your clone stamp tool, okay, which is not there, but right there. You can just hit the letter S. Go to your clone stamp tool and make sure your opacity is at 100% and your blend mode is normal. And then you have all layers checked over here, because what I can do is now I can get a really small brush here. I can sample from an area and I can clone and just come in here and clone away any little areas that happen to be around the bird. Right there. And right there. So it doesn't look like he's got a glow or anything around him, maybe even a little bit down here. So when I back out, now it looks like we have, and if somebody were to zoom in, now it looks like we have sharp birds back there rather than blurry birds. And it was all done just because we had another version of this photo. Okay, so I mentioned in the beginning, if you haven't shot any long exposures yet, neutral density filters are fairly cheap when it comes to photography. We spend $1,000 on lenses. You can get a nice 3-stop or a 6-stop neutral density filter for somewhere in the range of $40 or $50. Might be $100 for some of those 10-stop ones, up to $150. But there's some really neat stuff that you can do with this, and this is a tip to know ahead of time before you go out there. So take that step, just take a few photos of the scene before you do any long exposure, so you get everything still. And that is if you have something moving in the scene, and then you can go and do your longer exposures. And if there was anything moving, if it's another example would be if there was a boat here. Okay, and a 60-second exposure, if you had a boat docked along the dock here, the boat would rock and there'd be motion blur there. So I would take one photo without the long exposure, and that way I'd be able to paint a sharp version of the boat back in. You can do it with people, you can do it with trees, whatever happens to be moving in the scene. Take a sharp photo of it first. That way you always have it to use later on. All right, folks, hope you enjoyed. My name is Matt Kloskowski, and I'll talk to you again soon.